Welcome back. My name is Kenzie and I am your watercolor instructor for today. And we're going to be painting this lavender girl. And I am obsessed with this piece. My favorite color is purple, so I felt like, we had to have some purple in here. And I also love painting florals. So I felt like this was a really good introduction to some loose watercolor florals because we did a mixture of wet and wet to kind of play with depth and dimension. And then also introduce skin tone because skin tone can be kind of tricky, especially when you're trying to layer for the creases of the arms, the backbone, stuff like that. So I'm excited to paint this piece with you, so let's get started. So for my supplies, I have 2 water jugs, a cloth to tap, 3 brushes, and I have my watercolor palette, and I'm just applying my tape to my sheet of paper, and let's get painting. So once we're done with the painter's tape, I'm going in around the hat and just creating some little lines with the very tip of my brush. I'm not going to do a lot, I'm just going to let this part dry, and then I'll come back to it. I'm going to be painting my dress yellow. So I have a little ribbon at the top of the hat that I wanted to match with my dress. So I'm just painting that on first so that it has time to dry before I add any more paint to my hat later on in the painting. So I have that yellow down, but I'm going to go around at the very corners and I'm going to tap a little bit of a browny yellow to kind of create some shadow right there. I also grabbed a damp brush and I lifted some of the color from the center just to create a natural highlight. For the dress, this is probably the trickiest part of the painting. I'm going in with a yellow and I'm going to be going around kind of the ink marks because one, I really want to hide the ink marks. I don't want to see them. And two, it's really nice to kind of create more details with the dress by adding some creases to it. So you'll see I'm using my yellow and I'm going to let these dry and then I'll just keep layering on top. I would say the key here though is when you're putting down your yellow to make sure you're blending everything out beautifully, and I typically blend with just water. That way you don't have any harsh lines or any marks in your dress. So whenever you put down your first crease, grab your brush, dip it in water, tap it in your napkin, and then wherever you see that there's a harsh line, just blend it out with that to make it smooth. So it looks pretty good. So I'm going to dry it now. And then once it's dry, I'm going to go in with my second layer and I'm going to kind of repeat what I just did again to kind of disguise the ink marks and using the same technique with the water to blend it out because I don't want any harsh lines, but I also want to make sure that I'm leaving the first layer to kind of shine through. Otherwise, you're just slapping a color on top and you won't be able to kind of see it. It just makes it darker. So make sure you're still leaving that first layer, but then just shadowing ever so slightly with that darker color just to create more of a nice blend. Now we're at the fun part. Now I'm going to be covering the dress with my first layer of yellow. I'm going to do this a couple times, but I want to gradually build up to like a really nice yellow. I don't just want to put down a bunch of really pigmented paint yet. So I'm just going to do my very first layer and making sure at the bottom of my dress that you kind of scoop up a lot of that yellow so it's just a wash of it. So here you're going to see I'm starting my skin tone. I like to mix equal parts of red, yellow, and just a hint of blue. I find that creates a really pretty skin tone. And make sure you're going up into the hairline because I feel like that also just gives it more of like a natural blend when the hair kind of comes over top the skin. So you'll see I'm going up to where the hair is as well. And I'm just putting my first layer down of skin. I'm going to come back to it and kind of create some shadows with a second layer. So like I said, we're going to be doing a couple layers, but this is still technically your first layer. I'm just tapping in a darker skin tone mix to it, and I'm moving it around while it's wet, so that way it kind of has time to blend and there's no harsh lines. It's a lot easier to kind of move around as well while it's wet. So this is when it can get kind of tricky. My first layer is now dry, and now when I add in my second layer of my skin tone, it's going to just sit on top, but you're going to want to make sure that you're really blending it out so you don't have harsh lines. So again, using the same technique as the dress, you're going to put down your first layer, and then you would just grab a damp, clean brush, and then you would just kind of, you know, clean off the harsh line that you have. And I'm just using the dryer just to kind of speed up the process. I have the dryer kind of holding, and that way I can just keep layering. So for those who aren't familiar, this is masking fluid. This kind of acts as a barrier, and whatever you put on, like the masking fluid on, you let it dry, and then you can actually just paint over top. This is a really cool tool to use with watercolor, and I highly recommend it. I use it very often, and I am wanting in this bouquet of flowers, I want to have a little bit of, white flowers in there. And it's going to be really hard for me to kind of create these lavender petals and greenery and still have my white flowers. So that's why I'm going to be using the masking fluid. And I'm just going to be doing really loose circles. They're not going to be perfect circles. I'm going to do it all the way around my bouquet of flowers. And then I'm going to let it dry. It only takes maybe 30 seconds to 2 minutes max, depending on how heavy you put the masking fluid on, and then we can paint over top. So to give the masking fluid some time to dry, I have gone ahead and mixed up some greens. I love the mix of green, red, and just a hint of brown. I feel like it just makes it a very earthy green. And then I'm going to come down and do some stems and just a little bit of, loose greenery inside the bouquet as well. And I'm going to make sure that I'm kind of rotating between like a wash of the green and a darker green. And if you're finding that everything is kind of blending together in the stem, just dry it. And that way you can kind of move on to different stems and just use the very tip of your brush so you don't have too thick of a stem. So I have about 3 different purples in my palette, and I use a variation between more of a bluey purple and then a reddy purple and then just a wash of a purple. And this is the fun part. So using the very tip of my brush, I'm kind of blotting the shape of lavender, and I'm leaving some gaps in white space just to kind of give it a little bit more depth. So for the shape of lavender, I always start at the very top of the lavender petal that has a darker shade, and while it's wet, you can tap it too. That gives it dabs, and then I work my way out so it's thicker. And I'm going to just be moving around the bouquet, making sure that I'm letting each little lavender petal dry. Otherwise, it's all just kind of going to bleed and not look very pretty. You can always just practice on a scratch piece of paper as well if you don't feel confident with this. So once you've filled in your lavender, you can now come down and do a wash at the bottom. You're going to see that I have muggy water, but the purple water works, so I'm not so worried about it. So I have my purple up top, and then I have my green at the bottom. And then when I want these two colors to blend, I just use water there. And I'm kind of pushing it in a little bit, and you're going to see that because it's two wet surfaces, it's the wet on wet, it's all just going to kind of blend very nicely right there. So the wet on wet technique is great when you're wanting to give the illusion of things in the distance because it just kind of blends and it's very soft. So you're going to see here that I'm now doing the exact same lavender shapes that I did on the bouquet of flowers to kind of represent the lavender field that she's in. And again, I'm rotating between my different shades of purple that I have. So this is the loose floral part. I wouldn't get fixated on having the most perfect petals because it is all going to blend anyway. And if you move too slowly, you're going to find that this is going to dry and then everything's going to be way more detailed than what you want it to be for this. So move quickly. I would not get fixated on the shapes at all. So I decided to dry it, and I'm still using a wash. I'm not going in too dark, and I'm filling in any of the awkward gaps that I have and just slowly building that lavender field, again rotating between my different shades of purple. The only thing I would have changed is when the green at the bottom was wet, I wish I would have gone in and did some stems in the background, but that's okay. If I paint this again, I'll do it. But I'm now going in and I am just using the very tip of my brush, using very light strokes to kind of create some stems, just in between, just filling up any awkward spacing that I have as well. I'm not going too crazy, but I'm definitely adding a good amount of stems. So you'll see here I'm also kind of rotating between different types of greens. I'm going in with some darker greens now, just to kind of create some shadows. So I'm going to put some purple on my brush and I just kind of flick the top of the brush and it kind of creates some splats on my page, and I think this is a really cool element for my piece. So before I remove the masking fluid, I'm going in and I'm adding more depth to my greenery. I'm going to be adding a little bit more green inside the bouquet as well. I decided to have my girl have brunette hair, so I have a few different shades of brown. Again, doing the same technique as before, I'm going to put down my lighter color, I'm going to let it dry, and then do flicks, I guess, to kind of represent hair with darker colors. Otherwise, everything's just going to blend if I do it all at once. So definitely layer the hair if you want it to be more realistic. So make sure your hair is dry before you move on to your hat. And I'm going to go in using the very tip of my brush, and I'm going to do little brush strokes that kind of represent a straw hat. I don't want it to be too thick, and I'm going to let kind of like all these layers dry before I go in with darker layers. Otherwise, again, it's just all going to blend and not have much depth to it. So I shadowed right underneath the hat as well, and now I'm coming in and I am covering the whole hat with a really light yellowy brown color. I kind of want this to look like a wickered straw hat, which is why I decided to do this. And I'm going to cover the top of it and the big part of the hat at the bottom. And I'm going to dry it, and then I'm going to kind of go in as well and just do more lines with the very top tip of my brush. Now that we have the majority of our colors down, you can kind of take a look at your piece and see if there's anything that you want to add to it, any more details. You'll see here that I'm just adding a little bit more depth to my bow, my sleeve, and then other parts of the dress. Again, this is just all about layering and kind of creating more dimension to your girl's dress and hat and all the things. So you want to make sure that before you finish, you kind of look around and see what you want to add. So this is when the flowers are going to kind of come alive. I mixed up a dark purple, and I'm going to ever so slightly go into my lavender field and my bouquet and add that darkness to it, and I really feel like it just makes the piece just pop. The key with the masking fluid is that you have to let it 100% dry before you remove it, otherwise you rip the page or you start smudging everything. So I have dried my bouquet and now I'm using the very tip of my finger to remove it. It is so satisfying. Or you can even just use an eraser as well, and it just kind of peels off. It's very fun. Moving on to the centers of the flowers, I mixed up a gray and I'm going to apply the wash of gray in each one of the white petals, and then I'm going to dry it. And then once it's dry, I'm going in with like a orangey reddish color and just tapping the centers. I like that I applied the gray first because I feel like it just adds that extra layer of visual appeal because there's a little bit of depth and shadowing to it, so it doesn't look so flat. So once you're happy with everything, you're going to want to dry it. And then I applied some water first because I find that when I'm covering large surfaces that I'd like to use water. Otherwise it gets kind of streaky because the watercolor paper dries really quickly. So I'm applying some fresh water first, and then I'm going to go in and create my sky. So I am tapping in now just a wash of a blue, and when it comes to the outer part of the piece, since it is already wet, there is going to be a natural blend. But if you ever find that it's a little too blue towards the edge, you can just grab either like a napkin or a damp brush with just water, and it will scoop up any extra paint that's kind of lingering. Ideally, you want the blue to be darker towards the girl and then lighter as it goes towards the edge of the paper. So yeah, just make sure you're kind of scooping up and making sure there is a gradient. So I'm just putting my finishing touches on this now, making sure everything is blended out perfectly. When I am done, I'm going to take off my masking tape, and I just wanted to say thank you for painting with me. This was such a fun project and I hope you enjoyed it as well.